So if we go back to Ecclesiastes 1, in verse 12, I'll just tell you, I believe that this is Solomon, who identifies himself as a teacher or a preacher, a king over Israel and Jerusalem, and that he gained more wisdom and more possessions than anyone who was before him. Now, when I taught Emma and Caleb this class, because we studied poetry for the wisdom literature last quarter, I just kind of started with the question, like, if you had big questions about life, who would you go to? Someone older, someone wiser, someone who's had a lot of experience. And so as we're looking for, if anybody comes around and it's like, I'm looking for the meaning of life, I'm looking for answers to the disappointments that I face. Well, who better to ask than somebody like Solomon, who not only had it all and knew it all and had experienced it all, but who also had insight and a connection with God to be able to compare both of these sets of experiences and knowledge. And so when you ask Solomon, what he ends up saying in verse 14 is that he has seen all things that are done under the sun, and he has found everything to be futile and a pursuit of the wind. Now, like, I can't catch the air that is right here beside me, but oftentimes the things that we are looking at in life that we want to pursue, different accomplishments, different experiences, we see those things as things of substance. It's like my water bottle. I can grab it, I can hold on to it, and possess it. But what Solomon is saying is that a lot of the things people pursue, you think you're grabbing for something physical that you can attain, but it only happens to be the air. And you can't actually catch it. He says, that is the state of all things that are done under the sun. You're pursuing, but you can never achieve and hold on to it. Steve's translation called it that everything under the sun is vanity and a vexation of the heart, or vexation. And yeah, like, how do you feel when you spend so much of your effort pursuing something only to not be able to reach it? You're disappointed. That's the vexation aspect that goes on inside of you. And Solomon really backs up his claim here that he has knowledge on this topic, because in chapter 2 and verse 1, he explains how he has pursued all of this physical experience so that he can try to find the answer. So in chapter 2 and verse 1, he said, I said to myself, go ahead, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy what is good. But it turned out to be futile. And I said about laughter, maybe if I watch a sitcom and I spend all my time laughing and enjoying, and you're smiling and you should be happy, right? But I said about laughter that laughter is madness. And I said about pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored with my mind the pull of wine on my body. My mind's still guiding me with wisdom. He's being careful how he tests his body with wine. And he sought how to grasp folly until he could see that it was good for what it was good for people to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. Well, laughter, pleasure, all that turned out to be vanity. So maybe it's not just me being at home and laughing and drinking wine, but maybe if I do some big achievements. Well, I'm glad you asked, because in verse 4 he says, I increased my achievements. I built houses. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself and planted every kind of fruit tree in them. That's going to be like Jesse's home, because he loves all the fruit trees and all of that. But is that going to make him happy? He constructed reservoirs for myself from which to irrigate a grove of flourishing trees. Well, that turned out to be too much for him to manage, right? So now now his accomplishments are just so big. Like you can think about maybe the company Amazon, and they are so huge. They have to have employees and warehouses and things everywhere just to manage the company. Well, with Solomon, his estate and his buildings and farms and gardens became so big that in verse 7 he acquired male and female servants and had slaves who were born into my house. So generations of servants. He also owned livestock, large herds and flocks, more than all who were before me in Israel, he said. In verse 8, I also amassed silver and gold for myself, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I gathered male and female singers for myself, and many concubines, the delights of men. So I became great, and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also remained with me. All that my eyes desired, I did not deny them, and I did not refuse myself any pleasure, for I took pleasure in all my struggles. This was my reward for all my struggles. When I considered all that I had accomplished and what I had labored to achieve, I found everything to be futile and a pursuit of the wind. There was nothing to be gained under the sun. So yeah, if you wanted to ask the most successful person, like think of the guy in charge of Amazon. Ask him, hey, what have all your accomplishments gotten you? Like you spend your days in pleasure. You have more money than anybody can even imagine. You've built a company bigger than any other company. What good does that do you? And that's kind of Solomon's situation. His answer, Solomon's answer, is I found everything to be futile and a pursuit of the wind. To be sure, he built physical houses, he planted physical trees, he had physical servants. And so you can look at what he's accomplished. But what he describes as striving after the wind is this, what I believe is just this internal desire for satisfaction. Maybe these physical things will satisfy. Oh no, it's actually vain. What he pursued. He can never reach that. Like I don't know. Sometimes when I'm on the trail, I can't get that full breath, and I always feel like I just can't fully breathe. And it's that same kind of that sense of fullness. Again, satisfaction, not being disappointed, and for all of his work. And by the way, we can never accomplish what Solomon accomplished physically. And if it was vain for him, it's going to be vain for us. We can't reach the satisfaction in those physical things. And so what we're left with is a lot of disappointment. Chasing after the wind, it's a thing that you can't catch. But this is what this really comes down to, the matter of vanity being something that vexes us, is a matter of expectations. This is an expectations issue. Solomon expected these things to make his heart full. But then when he actually was able to accomplish the physical thing, he was still left empty. And so the first thing I want to tell you is this. Disappointment is often a clue that you might be chasing something that's vain. Or, I could put it this way, disappointment is a clue that your expectations of life are too high. We're going to explore that a little bit here. If you look in chapter 2 and verse 18, let me just ask you if you have ever felt this way. Ecclesiastes 2:18. I hated all my work that I labored at under the sun, because I must leave it to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool, and yet he will take over all my work that I labored at skillfully under the sun. This too is futile. So I began to give myself over to despair concerning all my work that I have labored at under the sun. When there's a person whose work was done with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and he must give his portion to a person who has not worked for it. This too is futile and a great wrong. Just look at the emotions that he faces. In verse 18, I hated all my work that I labored at. And then in verse 20, so I began to give myself over to despair. Okay, when you encounter things that are disappointing, you have those emotions of hate, like, I just hate my job. I hate my job because of X, Y, Z. And you can list out the reasons of how it's not measuring up to what you wanted out of this job. Or you come into work and you face really difficult situations, and so you can find yourself hating and despairing the situation that you're in. But as we see in chapter 3, this is pretty well-known verses. In chapter 3 and verse 1, there's an occasion for everything. That in all of the ups and downs of life are given a time under the sun. Like there's a time in verse 1 for every activity under heaven, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal. And it goes through all of those. What it's saying is that there will be those ups and downs. It is appointed in earth that there will be those ups and downs. But what we find in verse 11 is Solomon's comment on the fact that there is time for all these ups and downs. He says that he has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also put eternity in their hearts, but no one can discover the work of God, the work God has done from the beginning to the end. So while we look at the earth and we observe all of these changes, that there is life and death, there's planting and uprooting, there is searching and losing, throwing stones, gathering stones. We look at the earth and there's all these changes. But God has put eternity in people's hearts. Well, those two things are in conflict, aren't they? On one hand, all these things that change. But on the other hand, in my heart is a desire for eternity, for something that lasts and continues as it is. I don't think it means he's put eternity in our hearts as in he's put an eternal spirit in our hearts. That may be part of it, but I think what he's talking about in this passage is we have a desire for eternity. Let's look at some clues to that we want things to last forever. Who here likes change? Just go ahead and raise your hand. Who likes change? Oh, he likes change. Will likes change. I like change. Sarah likes change. I sort of like change. Yeah, Kathy, Carmen. Change is okay. Who likes bad change? Okay, all the change people are out now. Who likes bad change? I don't even like bad change, but I like some degree of change. I want things to last forever. Like, look, Camp Week is awesome. I wish that situation of encouragement and openness and energy could just last forever. And it doesn't. Like, good things come to an end. And we're disappointed about that. It's like, you have such a high, and then you end up with a big low that comes after that. Even your mood, your emotion toward that doesn't stay the same. And we just wish that it would, and that we could hold on to these moments. With your kids, they grow up so fast, and no matter what pictures you take, no matter what video you take, you will never be able to hold on to those moments. And that's disappointing. Like, watching a video, and it's like you can laugh and sort of enjoy that little video, but it's not the same as being there in that moment. There are other things that don't last. Relationships fade. Friends have conflicts. Jobs don't work out. Your weight goes up and then it goes down and then goes up again. People die prematurely. Houses, cars break down. And we just, oh man, I can't believe that I'm having this brake issue. Well, look, it's a physical thing. It's going to break down. But you can see how our desire is in competition with reality. We desire things to last forever, even basic physical things like this or like my water bottle. Like we want things to just last, and they don't. And we're disappointed. Oh, now I gotta buy a new one. Okay, so that's one clue that eternity is in your heart. You look at things, you try to make things last forever, and you're disappointed when they don't. Another clue that eternity is in our hearts is that we face disappointing situations. Let me tell you just a few things. I had a coworker who retired at the beginning of COVID, and she had worked at Beacon since out of high school, and she finally retired, and she was looking forward to traveling with her husband who drove trucks, and he died 2 months after her retirement. You just look and you're like, what a tragedy. You look at a product online and you're kind of wrestling around and, oh, that would be so much better for our house if we did that. Or, oh, this thing I'm doing would be so much easier. And so you spend all this time hoping and deliberating. And then you finally buy it, only to find out there's something wrong with the product. Or only to find out it doesn't make it quite as efficient as you thought it would. Or just fill in your disappointment with it. You expect marriage to be perfect, to solve issues that you have, and then you get married, and those things don't match up. You don't have quite the peace you thought you would have. You don't have the constant satisfaction or the always being fireworks. I like Dee's comment in the class about having to put in the effort to keep those things up. Anyway, I won't continue with all the disappointment. Like, just look at your disappointments and then see whether that is tied to an expectation issue. That you're expecting things to be satisfying when, in fact, the physical things on earth are vain. It is exactly these kinds of disappointments that Solomon draws on throughout the book of Ecclesiastes to demonstrate that a physical life is just striving in vain for satisfaction. Like, even the wealthy aren't satisfied. They have to stay up all night worrying that someone will steal their riches. Look at how he describes something in chapter 5 and verse 13. I think translations like the New King James will talk about this is a grievous wrong. The way the CSB puts it is, there is a sickening tragedy I have seen under the sun. And yeah, like some of these tragedies just turn your stomach at the discomfort and anxiety over these situations. So Solomon says in 5:13, there is a sickening tragedy I have seen under the sun. Wealth is kept by its owner to his harm. That wealth was lost in a bad venture. So when he fathered a son, he was empty-handed. As he came from his mother's womb, so he will go again, naked as he came. He will take nothing for his efforts that he can carry in his hands. This too is a sickening tragedy. Exactly as he comes, so he will go. So what does one gain who struggles for the wind? What is more is he eats in darkness all his days, with much frustration, sickness, and anger. Yeah, sickening tragedies. Anybody who listens to stories out of the Depression, I've heard stories about my great-grandpa's family and my grandpa starting out as a minister and how all that went. Yeah, some sickening disappointments that are even just economic in nature. And Solomon just points to thing after thing after thing that is disappointing. here's where Solomon is getting. All of these disappointments are going to happen under the sun. Where he's getting is, like, if we just imagine here's the universe and, the sun, all of the vain things happen under the sun. And he doesn't put it this way, but I think his point is you have to look beyond the sun to find the satisfying things, right? If everything under the sun is physical and disappoints, you have to look for the things that are not physical that will not disappoint. And of course, this is where he's going. At the end of the book in chapter 12, in verse 12, he says, "But beyond these, my son, be warned. There is no end to the making of many books, and much study wearies the body. But when all has been heard, the conclusion of the matter is this: fear God and keep his commandments, because this is for all humanity, or this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every act into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil." So, this thing about making many books. Everybody's going to try to write about, here's what you should follow after. Here's how you can have a more satisfying life. If you just think this way, if you just do this little hack in your life, then things are going to improve for you. But for all your study, for all the books you read, it all really comes down to this: fear God and keep his commandments. That's for everybody. That's what all men are supposed to do, because God is going to judge. Like, in the end, he's going to discern between the people who've done good and done bad. He says the same thing in chapter 11 and verse 9. Let's read part of the verse. He's talking to young people. "Rejoice, young person, while you are young, and let your heart be glad in the days of your youth, and walk in the ways of your heart and in the desire of your eyes." Well, that sounds pretty good. He's telling me I can do whatever I want. And he sort of is. But the rest of the verse says, "But just know that for all of these things, God will bring you into judgment." He says, the advantages you have, the energy that you have as a young person, use those things, do those things, and follow where your heart directs. But hedge it in by knowing that God is looking at your life, and he's going to see whether what you're doing is good or bad. All right. Bear with me just a little longer. If God, physical things will disappoint you. Things beyond the sun will not. In other words, God will not disappoint you. And we are to follow his commandments and fear him. If that is true, I want to ask you something challenging. Why, if we're honest, why does Christianity sometimes disappoint us? If the spiritual things are not supposed to disappoint us, why do some things in Christianity disappoint us? Let me give you some examples. Songs, hymns that we sing get old. And so do the song leaders. The preachers that we listen to, we've heard the same kinds of things. Like, I've talked about vanity before, so like the irony is there. Maybe we need a younger preacher who is deeper or more moving or more whatever. Within a service, you can look across at Christians that did something annoying to you. And now you're distracted from the spiritual service. Maybe the singing isn't as good. The preacher mixes up his words, like I was saying. He mispronounces words. The kids are crying. The lighting is harsh. The singing wasn't as good. People were tired and not energetic. I was distracted. I'm cold. I'm warm. I don't like the color of the wood paneling. And this is all going on during a spiritual activity. So why do we face disappointments even in spiritual activities like this? My answer would be that while we are still in the body, physical and spiritual things are always mingled. So even though there are spiritual realities beyond here, they are represented by physical things on the earth. Like it's still physical voices, physical eyes, physical brains, and buildings, and panels, and songbooks, and Bibles, and voices. And as long as those physical things exist, remember, it's the physical things that are vain. So if we're looking to those physical things to somehow be satisfying to us, we are going to come up short. Like, what's the solution to the vanity that we face in a worship service? Is it our solution needs to be better singing, a smoother preacher, better painted walls, and then we'll be spiritually engaged? No, it is the complete opposite of that. If we can accept that people are imperfect and that the color of the walls don't change us or make us more spiritually engaged, then we can look at things the way God looks at them, where he is always looking to the true heart of the matter and the spiritual reality. So when you read books like Ephesians or Revelation, where sometimes God just pulls back the curtain and says, here's what's really going on. Like in 2 Corinthians, he talks about our spiritual warfare. Or in Revelation, he pulls back the curtain and you get a glimpse into the way heaven really is. And he shows us realities like Satan prowling like a lion. That he's satisfied with the heart of a person, even when their voice and their words can't truly convey what is going on in their heart and in their spirit. My caution is this, is that we should, when we are disappointed in something, we should make sure that we are not chasing a solution that is just striving after wind. Because we're going to, if we paint the walls, if we paint the panels, okay, the building might look better, but that will not change the way that I worship. Because the way I worship is coming from inside of me. And it's about my attitude toward God. And, it may seem like I am just full of bad news today. That whatever you try on earth is just going to disappoint you. But this is actually good news. It's actually good news that physical things disappoint, because we tend to put too much pressure and expectation on our physical lives. Like, look, like even your friendships are going to fade. They're going to have their ups and downs. And that's what Emma brought out in our class, that, well, people are more satisfying than physical things, but you could still fight, or you could have arguments and all that. And the same is true about marriage. Like if you put the weight of your satisfaction, your ultimate satisfaction, on your spouse, you're gonna be disappointed. Just because we are physical and spiritual beings. We still have this physical element to us. And we are not perfect in heaven like we will be. Okay, so be careful about chasing things that are vain. Because the more that you indulge in that and say, well, really the solution is XYZ, and you choose a vain solution, you're going to keep on being disappointed. But you keep training yourself to seek physical solutions to spiritual problems, it is not going to be productive for you. There's a verse in 1 Timothy 6 that just talks about godliness with contentment is great gain. And he said, with food and with clothing, we'll be content with those. But those who desire to be rich fall into a snare. So what's the difference between Paul and someone who desires to be rich? How Paul can be content, but this rich person can't? This person who wants to be rich can't. It's the desire. The desire is at the root of your disappointments. Okay, so if you face a life where you keep on getting disappointed, look at your expectations. Don't look at life and say, but I deserve this. Or look at all the other people around me who have what I want, and I don't have it. The problem is not your life. God gives to each person as he sees fit. The problem is your expectation of what you deserve or what you ought to have in life. So, contentment, I can't force contentment on you, and I can't force disappointment on you. Because if you have a heart that says, I will be content whatever my situation, then you're strong. Like, I can do whatever to you and you won't be disappointed. You will have that godliness and that contentment. And you won't get caught up so much on the things in your life that are vain. So know this, that physical things don't last forever. But it matters that you seek the thing that does. These are the works of God. We didn't read this verse earlier in chapter 3, but I just want to, let's just go there for a second. Ecclesiastes 3, when he's just gotten done talking about all of these changing situations and how we desire eternity, look at one thing in these verses that lasts. Chapter 3, verse 14. I know that everything God does will last forever. There is no adding to it or taking away from it. God works so that people will be in awe of him. So yeah, we have the desire for eternal and lasting things in our heart. But it's the things of God that last forever. And it's his works that last forever. So we're about to sing the song in Heavenly Love Abiding, 667. There are lots of things in life to look forward to. And when they don't work out, it's extremely disappointing. Because you've been putting your effort and your hope and your thought all on one outcome. Or a few specific outcomes. So when it doesn't work out that way, it's sad. Maybe you feel like Solomon, that I hate my situation, or it's a grievous tragedy, or isn't it a shame that XYZ? Yeah, it kind of is a shame. It kind of is a tragedy. But the real tragedy is that you have put your hope in things that are worthless. That's the tragedy. And so my encouragement to you is to look to your disappointments and realize where you have set your expectations. As you're disappointed, you have an expectation that was underlying that. And if you are able to look at life and say, I just need to not put my hope in the physical things, then you can achieve the contentment that I think Solomon was looking for. That how can I be happy on the earth? I can only be happy by looking past the sun and past the temporary things and by pursuing God.